Thanks to everyone who's joined so far. So build versus buy, when to construct your own multifamily resident portal. Why are we having this conversation? So to me, it seems like this has been the question in multifamily since the adoption of online payments on the internet. And when I think about my experience, it feels to me like the question comes up more and more over the years, not less. It might have to do with the fact that there's more accessible technology and resource availability of people who can build this kind of stuff. I think it might have something more to do with the desire to control what the experience is for the resident and how technology is leveraged there. At any rate, we're going to get into that conversation. And as we do, our goal is to give you some insight and some framing to the many considerations that you'll have to go through in this process. In addition, I think we're going to come out with some really great takeaways and lessons learned from Stephanie and Andrew that they've experienced and encountered that you can maybe anticipate on your journey. So let's jump into introductions. Agenda first. So introduction, we'll go through introduction of our panelists. Thanks guys so much for joining. And then we'll get into a couple more slides and we'll get into the discussion. And roughly, it's going to be a flowing conversation, but roughly the questions will be kind of framed in this order of how did you make the decision and what was the evaluation that you used, moving into development and execution, and finally into rolling out and maintenance and lessons learned, and then hopefully we'll have some time at the end for some Q&A. So now we'll do introductions. Andrew, why don't you go ahead and give us an introduction to yourself.
Thanks, Jason. It's great to be here. My name is Andrew Min. I'm the Senior Vice President of Strategy and Digital Initiatives at RXR. For those who don't know RXR, we're about a $20 billion real estate private equity group, fully vertically integrated, so owner, property manager, investment manager, and I believe last time I saw we were the 5th largest owner of real estate in the New York City area. Within RXR, I oversee all of our digital initiatives, including this exact question of when to build and when to buy, and lead both our partnerships with various prop techs and other service providers on the partner side, and then also run an in-house technology team of software engineers, data scientists, designers, and product managers. It's great to be with everyone.
Thanks, Andrew. And Stephanie, how about you?
Thank you. I am Vice President for Innovation at Venterra, and we own and develop properties across the southeastern United States. We have about 25,000 units. And we, our founders were in the software industry before they got into real estate. So it only made sense that how we naturally led into building, getting into building software for the real estate industry.
Awesome. And then I'm new to Zego, so joining in December, but my name is Jason Schedler. I'm the VP of Product Management here. I have been in the prop tech space for over 20 years. I've worked at MRI Software for most of my career doing consulting, sales, and most of my career was spent there doing product management over multifamily, including launching Resident Connect and Prospect Connect years ago. I also worked as a senior developer for Equity Residential, so I've had some experience with the property management side of things. Yeah, and that's me. So thanks guys so much for joining. As we get into this conversation, I think it makes sense to kind of frame up what we mean when we talk about a resident portal. And so simply put, I'm just kind of dividing it into two distinct components, but I will give you guys a chance to talk about how you view it, assuming there's a difference there. I think gravity for a portal, it kind of started with and revolved around payments, not to make it about us. But payments are the one thing that it's like the most frequent interaction, the exchange of payment. It kind of starts there, but then that quickly became not the focus, and resident engagement turns into like the more important. Even though payments is like P0, the engagement side of it is how you really add value through the portal. So how your residents interact with the building and staff, thinking about service requests. I've seen roommate matching kind of stuff in the student housing side of things. Smart home controls listed here, package lockers, amenity reservation, rentable items, accounting for your pets, messaging. I mean, the list of stuff on the resident engagement side can be really, really long. And so part of this conversation is going to be, as we get into this, which of those features do you think are the critical ones, or at least the ones to start with? As we talk through the questions, we were planning this and we kind of thought about this from a high level, and we divided up what the conversation might look like into 4 big chunks. One of those is naturally when you take on a project, you want to start with what you want the outcome to be, and then what's the budget for that, and does the budget change as the goals kind of change? Second, what's the upfront cost and effort, and maybe thinking about time to market as part of those costs as an important factor, especially given the choice of building or buying. One might get you there a lot quicker than the other. 3, and I think every company that takes on a software endeavor that isn't a software shop goes through this question of, are we a software shop, or can we be one, or can we do that, and does that take away from what we do best, and is there a cost to that? And then third is you don't just launch software or technology. There's always an ongoing element of keeping it safe and adding new features and keeping up with what the market is doing. And so what's that ongoing risk and cost look like? So this frames up real nice, and all of our efforts to frame up things and make plans seem really straightforward, but as we all know, then you start working on stuff and it's never this straightforward. But with that, let's get into the chat part of it. So I guess I'll start with, and either of you feel free to answer, what are your thoughts on how we framed up the definition of resident portal?
Yeah, Jason, I'm happy to kick it off. So I think for us, it's a similar, I think we think about it in a very similar way at RXR, right? I think I would break resident engagement into two slightly different buckets. One bucket is your operational or almost transactional interactions with the building, right? Payments is definitely one of those. Work orders, right? Like something that I expect to have from my building, right? You could call it table stakes. And I think you're absolutely right. When people first download our app, they're downloading it because they want to pay their rent through the app because it's way more convenient than paying through a check. But I also agree with you that in order to stay engaged and keep using the app, because by the way, you can set up auto pay, you need to create a compelling reason to keep using the app. And I think that's where the customer experience comes in and the engagement piece. And that's where I would say things that kind of become more of a differentiated customer experience rather than just these are table stakes that I expect every building to offer, right? And so whether that's kind of building a digital relationship with your concierge through a messaging platform, seeing tailored events that are kind of marketed and kind of even segmented for specific user groups, smart home and smart access, as you mentioned, a lot of service providers like cleaning, dog walking, and so on. This is how we've actually, when we track our data usage, these are actually the features people use on a regular basis because again, once you download the payments once you set up the payments portion, you just set up auto pay. But people actually stay engaged. In our portfolio, we have about an 85% engagement rate on a monthly basis, and it's because people are constantly using these kind of next level hospitality features because that's what they're ultimately looking for out of an engagement app.
Great answer. Stephanie, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I didn't see like marketplace. I would say maybe add that. We do the marketplace functionality. Also, we have the notion of prospect portal in with ours as well. It's not mixed into the same data, obviously, but we do manage a prospect portal and offer a prospect portal as well.
I'm going to throw, since you're talking, I'll ask you first, Stephanie. When you look at engagement, what has been the feature beyond like the the sort of like obvious ones like payments or service requests, what's the feature that you think has driven engagement at the highest level? Like the single thing that you did that tended to drive up engagement?
For us, ours
Yeah.
is going to be just our communications and polls. I can't say confidently that we've invested in the engagement features as much as some of the off-the-shelf solutions have. Like I said, we have a marketplace, but we don't have the extensive engagement functionality as others do.
Okay. And then what about you, Andrew? What, you guys have built a lot. What are some of the features that you put in that you feel like drove? You said you have 85% engagement month over month. What do you think contributes most to that?
No, it's a good question. And I'd actually say I'd flip the question a little bit, because for us, we really try to be user backed, right? And so our view is, if you start by saying, what features do you want to build, or what features do we think would be cool, you end up building what a bunch of engineers think are really interesting, which technologically becomes really cool. And there are a lot of features that sometimes residents don't actually end up using. And so we actually start from kind of a top-down strategy. So RXR, in our multifamily strategy, not even our tech strategy, just our multifamily strategy, we attract knowledge economy workers who want urban quality housing in kind of underdeveloped areas. So think urban suburban downtowns like Stanford or New Rochelle around New York, think Deep Ellum around Dallas, right? And so what those types of workers bring with them are expectations for 5-star living, right? They're paying 5-star rent, so they expect 5-star hospitality. And so then the question is, okay, so how do you offer that level of hospitality and service? And if you look at comps from retail or hotels like the Ritz-Carlton, right, what you discover is that is two things. One is customer experience in general, not just in real estate. Again, retail, hospitality, e-commerce. People expect to be able to book a car with their phone, right? They expect to book a hotel with their phone, and they get really confused when they have to interact with their building, using pen and paper. So one is just digital expectations have changed to the point where it's table stakes in customer experience. But then the other thing is that data becomes really important to help understand what your customers want, sometimes even before they realize what they want, right? And so I think that's a really important framework, because there are digital features that people use a lot, right? So one for example, that a lot of people use our events feature, right? But the reason that people use our events feature is because we're building really tailored events for them, right? And part of how we build tailored events for them is we pull insights out of both our app, but out of a lot of other sources about our resident, and then build profiles and segments of a resident, and then say, okay, these are the types of events that are really going to resonate. And then we increase our exposure to those events, not just by putting posters and digital signage in the lobbies, but also by pushing it to the app. But if you've had bad events, no one would use it, right? Or similarly, we have a messaging feature, and one of the things we do in our messaging feature is we wish residents happy birthday. And residents, find that's amazing, right? Like when you remember it's someone's birthday, they feel really personalized and special, right? And they build this relationship with the concierge, right? It's not RXR wishing you a happy birthday. It's the actual RXR concierge, Eddie, who you know because you see Eddie at the front desk every day wishing you a happy birthday. But Eddie can't possibly remember every single person's birthday in the building, and so we push it to them through a CRM. Or another example is if there's a bad maintenance request, we actually flag it. Like we'll say, this maintenance request should have been closed 3 days ago using our algorithm. It hasn't been. Eddie, figure out what's going on, and then message the resident and proactively say, hey, I noticed that there was an issue with this maintenance request. I'm really sorry about that. Here's where it stands. Here's the solution to it, right? And like, those things really matter to residents, because if you either acknowledge pain or a mistake, or you create a moment of surprise and delight by wishing them happy birthday, those things really stick with them. But that's not you couldn't do that without a messaging feature.
Yeah,
if you had a messaging feature without that, it wouldn't matter.
Yeah, so like if I paraphrase what you're saying, and I think this is really important, and hopefully we'll get back into this a little bit later, but there's this other element, which is it's the people and the content. So you could have a great messaging system, but if you're not sending messages, or you have the events feature, but if you don't have someone thinking about what events people are going to want, then you may as well not have it, right? So the content and the people and the work that they do and how they know the residents is going to matter as much as the feature at the end of the day. I'm going to take a step back, Stephanie, and for you, want to get into, like, you guys made your decision kind of early. Talk a little bit about that, and then how did you sort of frame up the whole decision-making process? How did you structure that and put guides around it?
The decision to build.
Mm-hmm.
So because our founders came from software before they got into real estate, it was a fairly natural decision to want to build our own proprietary PMS, which they did. And so then when the decision to make to build a portal was to be made, it also was pretty natural to say that we should build a portal. Of course, developers are builders by nature. Like they want to build everything. That's what they come to work to do. They just want to build everything. You ask them if they can build anything. The question is if they should be building it. But when we sit down to really think through if we should be building something, it really is around, is it going to make a difference? Can we make it differentiating? Is there something out there already that is doing what we want out of this solution? Because if so, there's no reason we should build it. Or if we do build this thing, what's the opportunity cost? What are we not going to be able to do with our technology resources because we're spending time on this solution? And that all has to pan out in numbers and time, and just makes sense. So for us, it's about what kind of customization are we wanting in it? Is it going to give us a competitive advantage? It's about integrating with other systems, and that's a big one for us because we built our own PMS, right? So it makes very much sense there. And then scalability, obviously, is a big one. So the portal for us is it's an extension of your PMS to a large extent. So it made sense for us to build it for those reasons.
Yeah. Do you mind if I ask, like, just ballpark, what was the time frame of, all right, we're going to do this portal thing, to the decision of we're going to build it ourselves? Because it sounds like it was somewhat of a foregone conclusion for you, but did you put a lot of thought into it, or did you just kind of know you were going to go that direction?
I would say we pretty much knew we would have to build the portal. This was years ago. The initial web-based portal we built, years ago. We recently launched an app version of it, a native app. Again, we went through kind of some of the decision process, and even still today, we talk about, are we going to build certain functionality into our portal, or are we going to buy off the shelf? It's really not even a build-buy decision, right? It's more of are we going to build something, or are we going to integrate? Because you still have to use technology resources to integrate with something that you get off the shelf. So
that's an important point that you're making. We kind of, the way we frame up the webinar is build or buy, but it's kind of like you're always going to do a little bit of both in the process. But do you want to own that collection of things that you buy, or do you want to build around it, and how much of it do you want to build? So I'm going to ask you another question, and I'll come back to Andrew on sort of the same thing. But so for you, Stephanie, like, what were as you set out to build? Now, I've been in product management for a long time, so my habit is always like stack rank everything. What are we going to do first? Even if we can build multiple things at the same time, you kind of want to stack rank it and figure out how much you can release. What did your early stack ranking top 3-4 things look like?
Oh, in the very beginning, it was just the fundamentals of a portal. We had to have payments, contact us. People have to be able to get in touch with management and maintenance. So those were we had to have the fundamental things.
Okay. So Andrew, we chatted last week. Your answer was interesting on how you decided to go to the direction of building. Would you mind sharing for the group how you got there?
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe I'll even integrate kind of the requirements piece as well, because they kind of came together for us. So what we said at the beginning again was we said we want to build the best in class resident experience for anyone, right? And then we said, okay, based on our research and competitive benchmarking from other industries, technology should be a big piece of that. So then we said, okay, so what should those features be? And we did about we visited every single property we owned. We talked to every staff member there. We talked to many of the residents there. We probably did about 60 resident interviews, 60 real estate user interviews. We built a whole slew of personas, journey maps, surface pain points, surface opportunities to delight. And then we also said, all right, we should look beyond ourselves. And so we did a scan of probably 100 different startups in real estate tech, in prop tech, trying to understand where venture dollars are flowing, which isn't necessarily determinative, but gives you an idea of where smart people in venture think that innovation should be happening. And then we said, okay, but real estate sometimes is slow moving. So we should also look at other industries that we think are analogous to us. So we looked at what Starbucks was doing for customer experience. We looked at what Disney was doing for customer experience. And then we took it all together. We prioritized it through a bunch of different workshops and kind of the classic design thinking strategies. And we came up with a short list of both requirements on the software side, where we said, okay, we expect that, a digital customer experience has these components. And then we also said, the other thing that was really important that I alluded to earlier is that data is really important here too, right? You want to create an iterative cycle where you understand resident personas, again, so that you can make a better digital experience, but also so you can just make a better holistic resident experience. And then we said, okay, so, and actually our ingoing assumption was that we'd partner. And on the office side, in the office portfolio, we do partner with a third-party provider. So we ran a bunch of experiments. We used 3 or 4 different app providers in our portfolio at different buildings, and we weren't satisfied with any of them. And there were a bunch of reasons for that. One was a lot of the features were just not there. The UI wasn't there. The second was there was very limited data reporting. And I think some of that was intentional, right? I think a lot of these prop techs think that they're creating a moat by keeping all the data away from the owner and then having the owner rely on them for analytics. But we didn't want that. We have an in-house data science team. We wanted to be able to process all of this raw data, combine it with our market data, combine it with our operational data, and actually build resident models. And then the third one was, and we think, and I think this is one of the core pieces that structurally led us to build it ourselves, is that there wasn't really high quality integration with our on-site team. So for example, there was one provider that had a digital concierge, actually had an in-person concierge too. But it was a really weird experience for the resident, because if they had an in-person question or needed some in-person help with unpacking groceries, they would ask the property staff. But then if they wanted help with cleaning or some of these other services provided by the app, they would go to the app, and the app concierge would help. And it was like a totally disjointed process, right? And we said, that's not a best-in-class resident experience. And so for us, we said, I think that's one of the big disconnects, because a lot of these prop techs are run by people that have never owned buildings before. They don't really, and frankly, venture dollars don't flow to services businesses. They don't really have an incentive or necessarily even the knowledge to build a fully integrated resident experience the way we want to.
Yeah. This came up in our conversation earlier too, which hopefully we can get into a little bit more as well, which is the sort of intermingling of the physical and digital experience. And it's easy to get in this trap of like building a digital experience and only thinking about the digital experience and not thinking about like where the touch points are from a human perspective. So going back to Stephanie, feel free to expand on that, in person versus digital, but also then wanted to start getting into, for you guys, what did your launch look like, and what kind of time constraints did you put around feature sets? What were you comfortable rolling out first, and did you put time constraints, et cetera?
Well, when we just recently launched, we launched our app. So we launched an app for the App Store. And for this particular launch, we didn't really have a time constraint. What we wanted to do was we wanted to make sure we got it right. We wanted to make sure that what we were going to launch, we were proud of. So we already had a version that was responsive mobile, and it was functioning and it was sufficient. So we were in no need to, force something out or, just put something out that we weren't happy with. So we just continued to iterate on what we were building until until all stakeholders said, yes, this is what we want to move forward with. Within the confines of, we've got to get it out at some point. So once we met the specific functionality requirements that we had agreed on as far as the requirement scope, and we were happy with how it was functioning, then we rolled it out onto a couple of properties, tested that with users, watched how they were working through the app. We saw some issues with logins. We went with passwordless logins, so there were some issues with that on both sides. So we had some technical fails. We also had some, it confused the user, honestly. It was so new in general to consumers that we confused our user base. So it just took a while to get people converted. But what was interesting is that when we did do a full launch of that app, I say full launch, we actually soft launched. So we purposely did not do a full launch. And we still organically got to 80% of our interactions happening on the app versus on the web browser within a year. So it just goes to show that when people are in long-term relationships with a brand or any kind of a technology, that they're more willing to download an app for that experience.
That's I love that result, because that kind of answers a question that people tend to ask a lot, which is around, what will people really adopt? Do they really want a browser app, or do they really want a mobile app, or do they want both? And what do the different, age demographics prefer to do? So if I can back up a step for you guys, it sounds like you launched a browser app first, and then you followed on with a mobile app.
Yeah.
And does the mobile app, is it a completely different thing, or is it a responsive, adaptive kind of thing that is, based on your...
The only feature that the mobile app had that the browser version did not when we launched was notifications.
So you found, I just want to reiterate because I find it fascinating. So when you launched or soft launched your app, you took 80% of the browser app engagement and moved it over to the mobile app. So just to make sure I have it right, so then your other 20% stayed browser. That's like a really great experiment. I'm not sure you meant to do it, but really, really fascinating.
We were shocked as well.
Yeah. So.
But we designed and purposely designed for a better experience in mobile from the UI and user experience perspective. So all the functionality is in our browser version except for notifications. So
you feel like maybe you got to leapfrog your browser app user experience a little bit with the app experience. So you got some benefits of going second with that.
Yeah.
I could ask questions about this all day, but did you learn anything? I can't help myself, like from an age demographic perspective, are there different demographics that are more willing to use the app versus the browser, or did you find it to be sort of hard to interpret?
So the typical ones are like 20 to 45, or I'm sorry, 30 to 45 are more likely to download the app. Younger than 30, we found just as much hesitation as the older than 45. But it doesn't mean that they don't convert eventually.
Yeah, so over time you'll get there. So let's pivot over to Andrew. What was your philosophy on browser first, app first?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. So we again started with users, right? And I think discovered a couple things. One is a lot of the features that they wanted out of a digital experience, you had to build an app, a native app. So smart home is a really good example of that, right? It's really, you can build a web version to unlock your door and control your thermometer and your heating and so on. Right. It's really challenging. And so we said we didn't want to do that. But then the other thing was actually people told us we prefer the app. And actually it's interesting because when you have an app downloaded, it's on your home screen, right? If you have a mobile web, you may or may not bookmark it. And if you don't bookmark it, you may forget about it. And so it was actually surprising to us. We expected we'd start with a bit web and then build an app, if at all. And the overwhelming response from our residents was we actually want an app. So we built the app, and it was actually interesting because the first place we launched at was a demographic that the building was clearly our oldest demographic. The profile is, empty nesters that are downsizing. And that building today still is one of the highest adopted and engaged apps in our portfolio. And it's actually interesting because if you look at, there's a lot of like, and by the way, I'm sure it depends on the region and so on, but in our demographics at least, even if you do research and you look at use of social media or use of YouTube, like all these things that you ordinarily don't attribute to older demographics, they're actually on Facebook, they're actually on YouTube, right? Like to some extent, they're more than 30-year-olds are. And so we actually, to our surprise, found that they were actually pretty excited about using an app and felt pretty confident they could use it. And, there are certainly some that weren't, but our adoption and engagement at those properties are pretty smack dab in the middle of everything else. So I think those were the kind of main two reasons. One was that you kind of have to build it to build the full scope of what we're doing. But then the other one was just that our users told us that they wanted it. I will say on the staff side, we did the opposite and we have only built a web version. And part of that is a lot of the property teams don't want their staff to have phones because, for a variety of obvious reasons. And so it was actually important that it wasn't an app because we didn't want to require someone to have a phone. And so that is only a web portal that only works on the desktop and is actually intentionally not responsive.
That makes sense. All right, that is super fascinating to me. I think, what I learned is that when my parents get an iPhone, I'll sell my Apple stock because they peaked. But that's specific to my parents. But so let's get into that, like sort of, and I know Andrew, you have to drop soon. So I'll start with you on this one. So you guys have both went through this process, you both decided to build. Now you've got this this product, for lack of a better word, that's out there, this engagement tool, and you're collecting payments. Like, what does your ongoing maintenance look like? And how do you approach there's always new things you can do, and so how do you approach that question of what are we going to invest in next, and how much and how fast do we want to invest in it?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. So I think all in, we're spending about $2.5 million a year on kind of ongoing product development, and a big reason for that is if we just cut down to maintaining the existing product, it would be a fraction of that. But our view is that technology continues to evolve, right? And so if your digital customer experiences continue to evolve, so too, and their expectations, right? Because other industries are continuing to evolve, your product needs to evolve too. So we continue to spend, a pretty substantial chunk of money on it. But it's a great point, right? And I think we start with a theory that our theory of change is that if you can delight a resident, they're more likely to stay. And if they stay and you have high retention rates at the same or even higher rent levels, a retained resident is more valuable than a new resident, partially because their collection history, partially because you don't have to turn the unit, you don't have to market the unit. And so we do a couple of things in the service that one is we do a lot of analytics around proving out that value. So proving the value of a retained resident. The second thing is we do a lot of analytics around and spend a lot of our product development time on understanding drivers of retention and pulled from the app and then using it to kind of inform our product, our development teams and our asset management team. So for example, we pull all the messages we get about 30% of residents use it on a regular basis. We run natural language processing models on top of those to calculate sentiment, and then it generates a rolling sentiment score for each building, and then we can use that to identify what drives sentiment at the building. Is it down this week because there was a leak and then we find out about the leak before anyone else. Is it up this week because of this event, because we hired a new staff member? And so we can actually start quantifying the value of that. And then we run that into another machine learning model where we actually predict the probability of someone renewing. Right now, our model with 85% accuracy can predict whether or not someone's going to renew. And that, again, helps you understand the value of all these different programs and interventions, some of which are digital, some aren't. So we spend a lot of our product development time on building both those models and then starting to roll those out into the workflows of our asset managers and our property managers. So all of those kind of get built into asset management software and property management software that we built as well. On the resident-facing side, first of all, a lot of what we're doing is trying to automate and push back a lot of those insights to our residents. So, the happy birthday messages are a good example. The work orders are a good example. Other things that we're focused on is trying to understand the holistic resident life cycle. So the newest product we're just about to launch is an onboarding product where even before you move into the building, we can help make sure that you put down your security deposit, you have renter's insurance, pet screening, right? It doesn't have to be paper anymore. And by the way, if you don't have one, we can recommend one, and it's all integrated. And then we also kind of will push through other services that you might be using off the shelf. So for example, we know that everyone in our building, in certain buildings, use a parking operator. So we're building out a feature where you can actually call the parking operator and they'll bring the car around rather than having to call down to the front desk. So kind of finding those opportunities to integrate with what our residents are already using at the building, and then pulling in to, one, increase the amount that the residents use it to begin with, which gives us more data, but then also to delight our residents further.
Awesome. And then before you go, I want to, first of all, thank you so much for joining this. Love hearing your story. And before you drop, just real quick, what was your biggest lesson learned in the process?
Yeah,
that's a real quick one to answer.
Yeah,
I'm forcing you to.
Real softball one at the end. It's a good question. I think one thing for us is constantly iterating and being honest with ourselves about where we stand relative to the field. So every year we do a full competitive teardown. We do pitches from vendors and we say, should we keep doing this? And the answer can't just be our app is ahead of the curve. We have to continue to have a structural reason. And so far, at least, our answer is there are things about the integrated resident experience we don't think a startup can replicate. And we've been honest with ourselves and actually said, should we stop? So that's, I think, the biggest one, because if you don't, you end up over investing in a product that just kind of falls behind everyone else. And we really wanted to make sure we avoided that. And then the other one is, I think, constantly iterating, right? Like there's always a risk in software of saying, I don't want to release it until it's perfect. And of course, you got to balance it with, these are real residents that are paying a lot of rent to live in our buildings. And so if you release a bad product to them, it's a bad idea. But even when we first released our product, we picked a small handful of residents and we said, this is going to be super buggy, but we want you to beta test it. And we kind of got their buy-in. And it was actually cool because so it was buggy when we worked through it with them, but they were totally fine doing that. And they did weekly focus groups and, we buy them small perks as thank yous. And it was cool because when we launched it, those residents were going out to their neighbors and saying, I helped build this. You should download it. It's amazing, right? And so it's easy to kind of sit there and say, I know exactly what I need to build. And we all have really good ideas about what we build and probably 80% right. But that missing 20%, I think a lot of times is because you don't actually just talk to the residents. And I think we've been really surprised by just how excited our residents are to be a part of it and help develop it. And just how much value we've gotten from keeping them in the entire loop.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Andrew. So Stephanie, let's go back, kind of same thing for you. What does your ongoing sort of maintenance look like? Do you also do that sort of reevaluation? Like, are we going to, do we want to keep doing this, or is there something available on market? And then how do you prioritize what you're going to do next?
Every year we have the same type of conversation. We have a value matrix. So we take pretty much any type of functionality that we want to that we'd like to build into the portal, and we run it through 3 filters: value to the business, value to the employee, and then value to the resident. And then those are scored individually, and then those scores are totaled and we look at where the most value is going to be had to help make our decisions and help frame those conversations.
And then how about for you? What were the sort of challenges, unexpected challenges, or biggest lessons learned, or even, what fascinated you that you found out that you didn't expect?
I think what I would say, most recently, what has been fascinating is the conversations around centralization, maybe is what is the most surprising thing that we're talking about recently. And, we do have a lot of nuanced and specialization and what we would call our special sauce in our payment options and our communication methods and some of the self-service things that we did very early on. We really focused on the fundamentals, like I said, and making sure they were very, very easy from a UI perspective, very easy, notice to vacate, just everything's just very easy from a fundamental perspective. Where we maybe should have focused a little bit more, now knowing where centralization is going in the multifamily industry, is that engagement piece. I think that as the multifamily industry does begin to centralize and if you are pulling people off site and you have less eyes on your properties, then it would make sense that you might want to be collecting more of that information through things that you're building so that you understand, your resident more. There is one significant difference between, Andrew's product and our product, which is he manages mostly towers, mm-hmm. and we're garden style. So it is a little bit different, but it's probably more challenging for the garden style operator in understanding where their resident is at all times through that resident journey than in a tower or a high-rise situation.
Sure.
So.
Yeah, it's an important point. I've been doing product management in this space for since 2010. So I just continually learn that there's not one answer. It's like I remember when I first started into product management that the idea was that things were going to centralize, and some did and some didn't. And then do you think the pandemic, kind of forced that conversation again? So those who maybe were on the verge of going that direction finally, made the commitment to go that direction?
I think it certainly forced us into the experimentation, right? Because we were all forced to, close our doors even at one point. So we experimented with self-guided tours, and we had to communicate with our residents using the technologies that we had, good, bad, or indifferent. And you learned a lot by doing that. We learned what we had available through self-service, and we learned what we didn't. I mean, yeah. As an industry, as individual operators, you understood very quickly where your gaps were. And I'm sure everybody is trying to fill those now, especially if you are wanting to go towards more of a self-service model. You either have to build them and provide them, or you're going to have to buy and license those options.
Makes total sense. How do you feel about doing some Q&A with the last few minutes?
Let's do it.
Okay, so we'll open up for questions. In the meantime, while we're waiting for them, I would ask you, I meant to ask you earlier, you did a soft launch with your mobile app. How did you figure out, what was your launch plan, and how did you figure that out?
How did we figure out how to launch it?
Yeah, who did you target for the soft launch of the mobile app? What was your decision making around that? Or am I misunderstanding the idea of the soft launch?
Maybe. We really just communicated that there was now an app available to complement the browser version. And we didn't make a big to-do about it, and we didn't force people to it.
I follow.
And
okay.
People just organically moved to it. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So you just kind of, and that's so. You got great engagement out of that, even not promoting it a ton. So Congrats on that. Looks like I do have a few questions, so I'm just going to read these on the fly. How would you suggest budgeting for this? How does the cost of ongoing maintenance compare to the cost of initial rollout?
Gosh, after I heard Andrew's maintenance spend, I don't even know that I am qualified to speak to ours. I'm questioning the numbers I got because I'm not on the technology team. And I came into this webinar a bit on the tail end of it. But I was told I feel pretty good about what we spent to build it because I was in those conversations. So we would have spent about $350 to build a portal on the front end, another $150 to build the app. On the maintenance side, we are able to repurpose all of our code. So the maintenance side, we're repurposing code. So it's not the $2.5 million that Andrew threw out. I can tell you that.
Yeah. So does it stay pretty flat? Like, do you kind of just, you do the maintenance you do with the team you have, then maybe over time decide if that's the right amount of stuff to do?
Yes.
Okay. A second question I have is, how did residents and on-site staff react when the portal was first introduced? And I think the question means the initial, browser app. Like, what was first of all, what year was it? And then what was the reaction to it?
Yeah, I should have said that. I should have said that early on. So the very first portal that we had was launched back in 2006 or so. And then we did a pretty sophisticated update and release, which was responsive in 2017. That one, got a lot of hoopla and cheers from our employees because it had a lot of back-end support as well, and back-end automation, and a lot of self-service baked into it. And then, of course, the app does as well.
So back and this would have been good to bring up earlier because the mobile first thing wasn't a thing when you launched your browser app, and so you did what a lot of companies did, was you had your browser-based app, and then you said, okay, we have to adapt to this world, but we don't want to completely re-engineer this thing for an app, and so you went responsive, and then I'm assuming the app came after the responsive investments went in. But did you have any strange reactions back in 2006, like that you didn't expect on the launch of all that?
No, I wouldn't say strange. I think that we underestimate really the value that consumers and renters will put on this technology, given that they're establishing long-term relationships with us. They do really want a seamless experience in that. I think the challenge ahead of us now will be more concerned about privacy and data privacy. So I think what we're looking to currently to ensure confidence there is just make sure that we're transparent with our residents, and we have a prospect portal, like I said, with how we're handling their data up front. The more we're transparent about that, making them confident there, because you don't want them to not download or not use or choose not to use your technology because of concerns there. So I think that's going to be the challenge going forward.
And that's a topic that warrants a whole session to get into security. Hoped we'd get to be able to touch on it, but it is a really big and important topic. And in fact, I think for some things that drives the buy versus build conversation on its own, like for payments or things like that.
Payments and even the smart home technology. We don't ingest our smart home technology, so we integrate with SmartRent, but we do not ingest the behavior data that SmartRent has. So it was interesting to hear Andrew speak about that on his side. He's obviously ingesting that and using it in data and making decisions based off of analyzing that data, which is it's really interesting to me from an experienced professional, just understanding how that informs the future experience for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's another one where it's a whole decision. How involved do we want to get? I'm going to get to this last question just to make sure I get it. So during development, did you ever consider canceling the project and go the buy route instead of
No.
building? It never was a thing. And I think I kind of knew you'd say that because of you guys are really tech first. I think Andrew would say the same, although he said they try to take a really objective approach to evaluating, if they're going to stay the course year over year.
I think you might consider cannibalizing certain parts, but even, hearing him speak about how passionate they are about the customer experience, it would be really hard to be that passionate about owning that and that being a competitive advantage and not needing to build a certain aspect of then the portal. Maybe not all of it, but you'd have to build some components of it if that's your competitive advantage.
Yeah, or at least the flexibility to make it into what you expect it to be. I agree.
Yeah.
Let's go into, there's a couple takeaways that we'll see how well we did. We kind of prepared after our earlier conversations and how we thought this would go. So one was, and this kind of came up more in my conversations with Andrew, but make sure to consider how the digital and physical worlds interact. And that's just, people don't just, work digitally and they don't only go into the office. They have to be able to do both. And you can't have scenarios where the staff don't have a visibility into what's happening in the digital world, so that, and there are some processes that start digital, go to physical, go back to digital, like the whole prospecting phase of renting. You're going to get maybe an electronic guest card, and then you're going to give someone a physical tour, and then they're going to go back and fill out an application. They kind of have to be able to hop back and forth. Second one that we sort of anticipated was allocating major resources and budget for ongoing maintenance. And I think that maybe it didn't come up as much in this call, but I've been around the notion of building your own tech, and I think it's often underestimated, even from a software perspective. It's easy to underestimate how much something's going to cost or how much time it's going to take to make it right. The third one.
Oh, and the maintenance part of it. I think I would say, at least for Venterra, we were committed to getting it right, the build. It's the maintenance that we underestimated, and how much we would want to iterate on every single year. And I think it's more important now. It's more valuable now with the engagement and experience that has come into the industry. So that's only going to be that spend is only going to get bigger.
Yeah. The third one, Andrew talked, I think in our previous conversations, they kind of went, at least he framed it this way earlier, that it really had more to do with data that led them down the build. They wanted to be able to leverage data to understand their resident engagement. But thinking about, and you said this as well, thinking about the data that you can collect when you're building each feature and making sure that you can actually harvest that and use it. We think about that at Zego too with Mobile Doorman, having a resident engagement score that will help our clients predict when a resident's more likely to renew. But there's tons of data, and I don't know if there's other areas that we didn't get into where you leverage data from your portal experience, but.
You could do a whole nother show on the valuable data and think about the data in the disparate systems, especially in our industry. I mentioned Smart Rent, but every operator has those disparate systems that if you bring that data in, it can change the insights that you get from the data that you collect from your portal. So you just cannot be scrubbing the data enough to understand what the next most valuable thing you should be investing in will be.
Yeah, I think there was one.
First and foremost, one of the funniest things that happened to us was one of the learning points that we learned the hard way was we would go to build a feature, we would not have the data, the BI people at the requirements table, making sure that we were collecting the right things that we were going to be tracking, or collecting the right things so that operations could build the right reporting and have what they needed. This is early in the early years. So we would come out of technology with this beautiful product, but operations wasn't able. We couldn't run reporting off of it or anything because we forgot to collect what data would be needed. So we weren't collecting, we weren't tracking, we weren't logging those interactions.
Yeah.
And there was no reporting on it.
Yeah, you almost need to think about what you want your reports to look like, or what you want your data schema to look like before you build the feature, so you can track those things, going forward.
Exactly.
There's one more thing that popped up today that occurred to me. That's a great takeaway. Is like, you can do all the technology and capture all the data, but like, if you're not working on content and like engaging with residents, it's not going to do anything. So you have to have smart content that relates to people. So another great takeaway. I'm going to do our last little slide here, unless you have anything else that didn't come up that you want to share. Okay. So it would be a miss for me if I didn't point out that Zego can be your portal gateway in terms of payments. Whether you buy or build, we can provide that payment solution for you. And you will be, after attending, getting an email from Katie, who's our inbound inquiry specialist, if you want to get more information. So Stephanie, thank you so much for participating in this. I learned a ton listening to both of you.
Me too.
It was a good time, so thanks.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
All right, take care.
Don't miss an episode. Subscribe now to the Resident Experience podcast on your favorite platforms like Apple, Spotify, and Stitcher. You can always access episodes, including guest details and transcripts, on Zego's website, gozego.com. To connect with us directly, make sure you follow @go_Zego on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram. Until next time, open the door to giving residents more.